Hey, thank you, Martha. And this is Tony Robles at Listen and Be Heard on WPVM FM. Do check us out online at listenandbeheard.net. This is another interview with another fantastic author. Today, we are going to be speaking with Darren Todd. Now, Darren is a freelance book editor for Evolved Publications, and his short fiction has appeared in over 40 publications over the years, including Hellbound Books, Chilling Tales for Dark Nights, and the Stone Slide Collective. He has had 4 plays and a feature-length film produced and a nonfiction book as well that has been published. He lives in, I guess he says, the border between Fletcher and Asheville. We'll talk about that. He lives there with his son and his girlfriend. Check him out online at Darren Todd. That's 2 R's and 2 D's. DarrenTodd.net. Darren, welcome to our show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Now you're the author of Ugly Mug, among many other pieces of work. I came upon Ugly Mug, incidentally, at a place called the Ugly Mug,
Right.
the coffee shop here in Hendersonville. And it was funny because I was heading back to the Bay Area for a friend who's having a book launch, and I saw it and I wanted to read it on the plane, but I only had my debit card, and Ugly Mug would only take cash.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah. So I wasn't able to get the book, but the cover was something that really caught my attention. It had kind of a comic book feel to it, and I thought at
Right.
first that it was a graphic novel. Tell us why you chose that cover for your
So,
book, and
right, I saw a guy's artwork. He's actually from Indonesia. Nowadays, I mean, you can kind of employ, people from across the world. That's the great part of it. And I came across this guy's work. He's Indonesian and loved it and had kind of in my head, I was like, not necessarily that it needed to be comic book-esque, but there was just something about that I liked. I mean, I love graphic novels, for instance, and comics back in the day, and it had this sort of, you know, Vault of Terror, Tales from the Crypt feel to it. I gave him some loose guidelines, and I just said, based on your other work, make it just like that. Like I'm
yeah,
complete free reign. Here's just, here's what it should contain. It took it quite literally because I had something on the back that says, so here you're just going to put this and that. And when I got it back, it said, so here you're just going to put this. And that. So there was a little, some miscommunication. I had to learn how to use Photoshop real quick and amend some of that. But yeah, he does mostly like comic style stuff anyway, less about covers. This was one of the first covers he had done, but I was super happy with it.
yeah, it definitely had a Tales of the Crypt kind of feel to it, and that must be an artist's dream come true, to be able to have kind of free reign to kind of go with the imagination and kind of try to interpret the overall tenor of the writing. Now, your stories, in reading the book, they're quite imaginative. They're very unique. I came away with this feeling that your stories have a disruptive quality to them. And what I mean by that is they upend our notions of things like time and perception, yet they seem to be anchored by a sense of a commentary. What I wanted to ask you is, how do you achieve that quality without being didactic?
So I think, when I've written a little bit of nonfiction, like I said, I wrote the one nonfiction book, and I was a journalist in college, but I think I got away from feeling like I needed to write anything else nonfiction. First of all, I felt stronger in fiction. And so if there's something that just stands out to me, whether it's anything from a curiosity to a social injustice to something that really scares me, I remember that and try and weave that in to something. And it, you know, I think nowadays it's sometimes tough to make commentary because, I mean, things feel very bifurcated. I mean, anyone who's been online, can understand that.
Yes.
Whereas fiction, I think, bridges a lot of gaps with people. They can relate to something, and it's not Darren Todd saying it. Maybe it's happening to a character. Maybe it's, I can even make it, something that's very Manichaean, where it's this is a, really bad guy and this good guy that this bad thing is happening to. But it's things that just have stood out to me that I suppose if I were writing nonfiction, those would be the things I'm writing about. But I'm much happier being able to weave them into fiction. I think people take it better too.
So in terms of genre, it looks like you're kind of taking from different types of genres and really making them unique in your own voice. Is your primary genre, is it horror or is it speculative or is it a combination of many different
I would
things?
say horror is probably primarily. I think I did more literary stuff. Uh, probably I got really into horror maybe a decade ago and love spec fic. And I that said, what I try to do with horror specifically is do, or even with spec, is something that doesn't necessarily abide by every convention of that genre. Sometimes it kind of bugs me when something gets a little bit too specific. So I'll
Yeah.
try and do the best that I can do. And like one story, it wasn't in this that I got published, was what would be called solar punk. And I thought, well, I get the idea of what that might mean, but I'm not going to read anything about solar punk. And I'm just going to write this and do the best I can do. And the guy reading it was like, this is not like the other stories. It doesn't really follow the conventions, but I like it and I want it. And I'm much happier with something like that. Don't get me wrong, there are conventions within horror that, the second I watch the beginning of a horror movie and it's like, Dad, why'd you move us away all this way out in the country and it's some haunted house thing? Oh, I'm
Yeah.
in, and I'll eat that stuff all day long. But when it comes to writing it, I usually try to make something that is sort of, I don't know, not necessarily general enough, but not abiding, too much by these conventions that hopefully then can work with a broader range of readers. I think people, they see the word horror on the cover, and sometimes they might be a little scared off by that. And I have to mention, I've tried to make these accessible.
Yeah.
This is not blood and guts horror, that kind of thing.
Yeah. I got a strong sense of that in the stories, and that's kind of what kept my attention. That I thought to myself, wow, this is really unique. He's doing this in not a conventional way, but he's doing it in another way. He's saying these things that are that you probably could maybe fall back on convention, but you're clearly not doing that. And for people that are listening to this right now who aren't familiar with speculative fiction, and I'm a little fuzzy on that too. Can you give your definition on what spec
Sure.
fiction is?
Yeah. I think to me, speculative fiction is when you are speculating on how something, what the world would be like, or what this situation, or what even this person would be like if this, and whatever that if is. So, and it doesn't even have to be something that is terribly novel. Your approach can be novel. I think about Stephen Gould doing Jumper, which got turned into a movie. They were novels first, and the idea is completely basic. You see it everywhere. Speculating, what if a person could teleport? And that's what that was the whole premise behind Jumper. But he took it in such a great way and just really kept peeling that onion on what does that mean? What would the person do? And what would they be? Who would be after them? And what dangers would they face?
Mm,
So
mm.
that to me is speculative. Is you're speculating on what this one change would have done to the world that this character inhabits.
No, it makes total sense. And the other thing that I got from reading the stories that I did in Ugly Mug, to me at least, it seems that your stories had kind of a somewhat of a cinematic quality to them as well. Um, do films inspire your writing? Have they inspired your writing?
So definitely my foundation in horror is definitely more film than stories. I had we had Cinemax growing up, which was its whole thing back when I was a kid,
Right.
was that it had this big variety. We may not have the best movies, but we've got the most movies. So you get
Yeah,
foreign films, you get B movies, you get this great variety of movies, and I would stay up late and watch things I shouldn't have been watching.
yeah.
But that was when it came to horror, I mean, I had, awful nightmares and everything like that, but that's what formed this foundation for me. So yeah, not the first I've heard about, that it felt cinematic, and that's just sort of the way that it plays in my brain, I think. And I read plenty of horror as well, but I'd say I probably have an equal measure, horror. Not so you don't find a lot of short films in horror, but feature length films in horror, most certainly. Historically as well as even now, I try and watch as many as I can.
Did you say Cinemax? What
Oh
was
yeah,
the
yeah.
Cinemax?
Cinemax back in the day, that was yep, that was their whole spiel is you know, they could get a whole big variety because they weren't paying the licensing that HBO was
Right,
paying, but then you
right.
get this, foreign stuff and just stuff
Yeah.
nobody else was seeing. Yeah.
Well, speaking of television, I come across AMC. I don't watch that much TV, but come across AMC, and it's been somewhat clear to me that AMC they could also be known as 24-hour Shawshank, because it seems like every time I go onto AMC, it's the Shawshank Redemption. I don't know what the deal is. I saw an interview with Walter Mosley not long ago, and he said that in publishing, that oftentimes the business wants to put the writer into a box, kind of like what they would do in a factory. You do one job and that's it. But when you step out and try to do other things, they don't know kind of where to put it. Um, you've been able to adapt to other genres, play, writing, film. How have you been able to adapt to other forms of literary art? How have you been able to cross over and make that a part of your, you know, totality, I guess, in your work?
Well, with short fiction, the good thing about short fiction is it's very much a prestige market. There's not a lot of money in it, but there's still lots of competition and stiff competition. So I won't say it's a complete meritocracy, but it's pretty close. Sometimes, of course, if a submission call has 1,000 submissions, I sometimes feel like if I get a rejection there, I was like, I can only hope they actually read it, because there's so
Yeah,
much competition with these.
yeah,
That said, uh, because it feels more like a meritocracy, sure, there's been a couple times when someone will say, I'll get someone who contacts me about a story instead of me just sending sending it blind and, maybe knowing the publication, but them not knowing me necessarily. So that means that, they're not worried too much about whether or not I am, Darren Todd, the horror writer, in order to be, published in this sort of thing. There are times in which, if I'm going to be published, especially I've been picked up by a few podcasts, and in that I'll give them something to work with in terms of, okay, your listeners are going to be horror fans. So I'll mention, just the horror stuff, I had enough things pubbed to where I can mention these things that your listeners might have heard of, and whereas literary kind of other way around. But I think with short fiction, again, it's way more about the content of it than your name necessarily. What you find often with collections is like I've got a couple different collections is they're always looking for some big name, usually something heavily anthologized. Here is the what's it called? Ramsey Campbell, The Callers again from Ramsey Campbell,
yeah,
something that's
yeah.
been anthologized a million times, but
Right.
then every other name you're probably not you won't have heard of. But
Mm.
it's 12 people chosen out of the few hundred or maybe even 1,000 who submitted. So ostensibly it's going to be pretty solid.
So, mostly short fiction. Have you thought of a longer thing like a novel?
I definitely have. So this year, I have two more pieces coming out this year, and that will make 50.
Mm.
And it is just this, it's a nice round, if arbitrary number. And I do have a horror screenplay that has been optioned by the same production company that did Planet George, the feature film that was made. And I'd love to see that be produced. Otherwise, I'm thinking about long form, just because it's like, well, I've done 50 short stories. I don't necessarily need any, more credentialism or something in short
Mm.
fiction. And so that is a very likely route over the next year or so, is looking at long form.
So you've gotten the option for, I guess it was the film, right?
Right.
Um, so that was an option uh, based on one of your stories. So they take your story and then I guess a screenwriter would.
So in this case, the one that was optioned is I co-wrote the screenplay. So
Oh,
I
okay.
actually did the screenplay. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So now a derivative work from something, I would love to see that. It's probably the closest I've had with that is the Chilling Tales for Dark Nights, where they'll do like almost a radio drama style production of a short story. I've had 3 of those picked up by them, where they do sound effects and scores and things like that.
Mhm. Wow, that's really something. It sounds like you have a lot of work, which is good, which is what we all want. Talk more about doing screenplays, because I know that there are two different things, and I'm guilty. I sometimes will watch Robert McKee on YouTube,
Right.
you know, but tell us about the difficulties in transitioning, because it's they're two different things. They're two different hats. So how is that hat different, especially if you're collaborating with another screenwriter?
Right. So I think the good part about screenplays is that there's going to be so many hands involved in it. That doesn't mean that someone who's not has years and years of experience doing screenplay and has done more, conventional, short fiction, whatever, like I have, doesn't mean that I don't need to make sure and abide by, the conventions of writing a script. That said, I do the best that I can do with it, but I'm not terribly concerned that it's perfect to whoever's going to read it, because I know there's going to go through several iterations. I mean, it's going to be
Mm,
touched by so many different people before, it actually happens, so that said, I have either adapted screenplays and edited them, done the rewriting on them, taken someone else's idea that they wanted to see turned into screenplay, and these are mostly for Dragonfly Bay Films, the production company that did Planet George, or collaborated with someone else. Starting from scratch and doing one that's, completely unique. I've certainly have a couple of those started and would certainly pick at them. It's tough. I think what would be hard about that is, almost everything's going to be spec. No one is out there begging for people to write screenplays.
right,
It's
right.
the other way around. Is you have to think of your screenplay almost like, a sample of your work. It is that, this is my CV, and if you like this, then maybe you'll hire me to write your idea instead of necessarily getting something optioned, which is rarer. I know I listened to script notes with Craig Mazin, and yeah, they were saying that it you're getting in to a production company and writing scripts that way. It's a slow process, mostly for people who have moved to LA and who've dedicated themselves to that, et cetera. And the what it takes to actually write a spec script and get that picked up nowadays. There are far more people in who try to become professional athletes who make, like NFL, than people who are able to be paid a working wage as screenwriters. So
Mm,
it's the odds are really tough.
yeah, yeah,
That said, I that's why I think it's just, if I were to do one, I would just have to. I love that I actually had one produced, and that another one's option, and I would love to see that one produced. By and large, I think part of the reason that I've collaborated with others on that, though, is because that could be a lonely profession. if you were
yeah,
if
yeah.
you're writing spec scripts and trying to workshop them and trying to get them in front of the right people, that could be tough solo. I think that's why I've always kind of worked with others on that stuff.
because it can be an energy boost, having somebody to bounce things off of
Definitely.
ideas. I give you much props on being able to branch out and do these other things. Ugly Mug, one of the things I liked about it was the fact that you could imbue in different objects a story. That because I used to work at thrift store in town, and a lot of my poetry actually had to do with these objects, these things that were in the thrift store, that there were hands on these things that created them. These things had a life before they they ended
Right.
up at the thrift store. So if you could maybe just talk about that, about you know some of these things might be commonplace, but you know there's complexity in the patina and the things that have been built on these objects. If you can speak to that, and then after that, if you could maybe read uh, a chapter, or just read a passage from. Are you going to read from Ugly Mug?
So actually, the one I was going to read a bit from is Out Ghent Lake.
Okay.
So a little further in, yeah. So yeah, and when it comes to particular objects, I guess I like. I think what attracts me to that is they have sort of a history of their own, but an object is not going to judge the way that, like, say, a relative would or something. Like, I guess what I would be thinking of is an object in a home, maybe it's an abusive home, maybe it's a very loving home, maybe it's a home where the guy found a way to make a portal to another dimension. Whatever it is, the idea that you have these sort of silent witnesses,
Mm,
to those sort of things.
yeah, yeah.
I like that idea. I wouldn't go so far as to write from a perspective of an inanimate object or something. Well, I haven't yet, let's say, but I just like that idea that they have almost a personality of their own, while it's still they may be different for each person that whose lives they're actually involved in. And yeah, that to me was just one of the things that's very attractive when it comes to, well, and everyone likes the idea too that let's say in a thrift store, if you happen upon something, I mean, who doesn't love the idea that you don't know what this thing has done or where it has been or what it meant to someone else. And I think that's what attracts people to certain older things. And theirs is to guess at that history, I suppose.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
you have the mug in the story, right? And it had what was it? What, um, yeah, I think you call it what, gold filigree? Is that what it was?
Right.
Gold filigree on the cup. And then there was another story about an eight ball, which I remember. That's of my generation. The
The
eight
magic
ball
eight ball.
fortune,
Right.
the magic eight ball, and I could just see the character kind of freaking out. What's going to happen? Okay, you know. Um, yeah, yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed that. So we're gonna have to wind down, but not before you read a passage from your story. And if you
Okay.
could give the title of the story.
This one is Out Ghent Lake,
Out Get
and
Lake. Okay.
most recently published in Cosmic Horror Monthly, July of last year. It's no wonder how some things stay hidden in this world. People don't believe in Mothman or Bigfoot because they think if they really existed, someone would have exposed them by now. That modern times would shine a light on anything like that, and every person on the planet would know about it in hours, thanks to the internet. They even got a name for them: cryptids. It means creatures whose existence is unproven. But if you look at where the word came from, the Greek, it just means hidden, a hidden creature. I realize that what lives in Ghent Lake will never take over the world. It's not even going to take over tiny little Rexton 10 miles away. That's because whatever's under that black water is patient. It doesn't care if people believe in it. But those few who do, mostly the old timers, they think there's only one of them. But I know different, because Daddy killed one, and, well, what happened after meant there was more than one to begin with.
All right. Thank you. And You know what? I want to hear the rest of that at some point. You pulled me in that lake. Anyway, again, Darren, thank you so much. And I was really glad to come across your book at the Ugly Mug. That's kind of a hangout for me, the coffee
Oh,
shop.
very cool. Yeah.
I'm there quite a bit, actually. If I'm not at home or if I'm not at work, I'm usually at the Ugly Mug. And when I saw the book, I said, "Oh man, check that out." And I was looking at it. I wanted to buy it for the plane ride, and I had my debit card. They said, we only take cash. I said, because my plan was, okay, I'm gonna read this all the way. I'm gonna read it cover to cover. By the time I hit California, I should be done. And then my idea was to contact you and set up the interview. But I'm glad that you sent me an electronic copy of it, so I was able to read some of the stories. Darren, again, thank you, and for our WPVM listeners and people that check us out on listenandbeheard.net, tell us how people can get in contact with you that want to get your books. If you have a website.
I do. It is Darren Todd, DarrenTodd.net. And that has all publications and even some videos and stuff like that I've done. And the Ugly Mug and Other Stories is on Audible, partly narrated by me, partly even having some versions that were done on the podcasts embedded in the audio version.
Fantastic.
And
Fantastic.
it's obviously also on Amazon.
Fantastic. Great. Again, Darren Todd, Darren Todd, 2 R's and 2 D's. And yeah, thank you so much. It was great speaking to you. And so right now we're going to throw it back to Martha in the studio at WPVM in Asheville, and we'll have her take it away. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tony.